Helen's Babies, Part 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Helen's Babies, by John Habberton. Part 3. The breakfast was an excellent one. I afterward learned that Helen, dear old girl, had herself prepared a bill of fare for every meal I should take in the house. As the table talk of myself and nephews was not such as could do harm by being repeated, I requested Maggie, the servant, to wait upon the children, and I accompanied my request with a small treasury note. Relieved thus of all responsibility for the dreadful appetites of my nephews, I did full justice to the repast, and even regarded with some interest and amusement the industry of Budge and Toddy with their tiny forks and spoons. They ate rapidly for a while, but soon their appetites weakened, and their tongues were unloosed. "Ocken Hawwy," remarked Toddy, "dey's an awful funny chunt upstairs, awful big chunt. I show it you after brepspup." "Toddy's a silly little boy," said Budge. "He always says brepspup for brekbucks." (Footnote: breakfast.) "Oh, what does he mean by chunt, Budge?" "I guess he means trunk," replied my oldest nephew. Recollections of my childish delight in rummaging an old trunk—it seems a century ago that I did it—caused me to smile sympathetically at Toddy, to his apparent great delight. How delightful it is to strike a sympathetic chord in child nature, thought I. How quickly the infant eye comprehends the look which precedes the verbal expression of an idea. Dear Toddy! For years we might sit at one table, careless of each other's words, but the casual mention of one of the delights has suddenly brought our souls into that sweetest of all human communions, that one which doubtless bound the Master himself to that apostle who was otherwise apparently the weakest among the chosen 12. An awful funny chunt seemed to annihilate suddenly all differences of age, condition, and experience between the wee boy and myself, and a direful thought struck me. I dashed upstairs and into my room. Yes, he did mean my trunk. I could see nothing funny about it, quite the contrary. The bond of sympathy between my nephew and myself was suddenly broken. Looking at the matter from the comparative distance which a few weeks have placed between that day and this, I can see that I was unable to consider the scene before me with a calm and unprejudiced mind. I am now satisfied that the sudden birth and hasty decrease of my sympathy with Toddy were striking instances of human inconsistency. My soul had gone out to his because he loved to rummage in trunks, and because I imagined he loved to see the monument of incongruous material which resulted from such an operation. The scene before me showed clearly that I had rightly divined my nephew's nature. And yet my selfish instincts hastened to obscure my soul's vision, and to prevent that joy which should ensue when faith is lost in full fruition. My trunk had contained nearly everything, for while a campaigner I had learned to reduce packing to an exact science. Now, had there been an atom of pride in my composition, I might have glorified myself, for it certainly seemed as if the heap upon the floor could never have come out of a single trunk. Clearly, Toddy was more of a general connoisseur than an amateur in packing. The method of his work I quickly discerned, and the discovery threw some light upon the size of the heap in front of my trunk. A dress hat and its case, when their natural relationship is dissolved, occupy nearly twice as much space as before, even if the former contains a blacking box not usually kept in it, and the latter contains a few cigars soaking in bay rum. The same might be said of a portable dressing case and its contents, bought for me in Vienna by a brother ex-soldier, and designed by an old continental campaigner to be perfection itself. The straps which prevented the cover from falling entirely back had been cut, broken, or parted in some way, and in its hollow lay my dress coat, tightly rolled up. Snatching it up with a violent exclamation, and unrolling it, there dropped from it one of those infernal dolls. At the same time a howl was sounded from the doorway. You tookted my dolly out of her cradle. I want to walk my dolly. Ooh-wee. You young scoundrel, I screamed. Yes, howled, I was so enraged. I've a great mind to cut your throat this minute. What do you mean by meddling with my trunk? I don't know. Outward turned Toddy's lower lip. I believe the sight of it would move a Bengal tiger to pity, but no such thought occurred to me just then. What made you do it? Because. Because what? I don't know. Just then a terrific roar arose from the garden. Looking out, I saw Budge with a bleeding finger upon one hand and my razor in the other. He afterward explained he had been making a boat, and that knife was bad to him. To apply adhesive plaster to the cut was the work of but a minute, and I had barely completed this surgical operation when Tom's gardener coachman appeared and handed me a letter. It was addressed in Helen's well-known hand, and read as follows. The passages in brackets were my own comments. Bloomdale, June 21st, 1875. Dear Harry, I'm very happy in the thought that you are with my darling children, and, although I'm having a lovely time here, I often wish I was with you. So do I. I want you to know the little treasures real well. Thank you, but I don't think I care to extend the acquaintanceship farther than is absolutely necessary. It seems to me so unnatural that relatives know so little of those of their own blood, and especially of the innocent little spirits whose existence is almost unheeded. Not when there's unlocked trunks standing about, sis. Now, I want to ask a favor of you. When we were boys and girls at home, you used to talk perfect oceans about physiognomy and phrenology and unerring signs of character. I thought it was all nonsense then, but if you believe any of it now, I wish you'd study the children and give me your well-considered opinion of them. Perfect demons, ma'am. Imps, rascals, born to be hung, both of them. I can't get over the feeling that dear Budge is born for something grand. Grand nuisance. He is sometimes so thoughtful and so absorbed that I almost fear the result of disturbing him. Then he has that faculty of perseverance which seems to be the only thing some men have lacked to make them great. He certainly has it. He exemplified it while I was trying to get to sleep this morning. Toddy is going to make a poet or a musician or an artist. That's so. All abominable scamps take to some artistic pursuit as an excuse for loafing. His fancies take hold of him very strongly. They do, they do. She wheels go wound, for instance. He has not Budgie's sublime earnestness, but he doesn't need it. The irresistible force with which he is drawn toward whatever is beautiful compensates for the lack. Ah, perhaps that explains his operation with my trunk. But I want your own opinion, for I know you make more careful distinction in character than I do. Delighting myself with the idea that I deserve most of the credit for the lots of reading you will have done by this time, and hoping I shall soon have a line telling me how my darlings are, I am, as ever, your loving sister, Helen. Seldom have I been so roused by a letter as I was by this one, and never did I promise myself more genuine pleasure in writing a reply. I determined that it should be a masterpiece of analysis and of calm yet forcible expression of opinion. Upon one step, at any rate, I was positively determined. Calling the girl, I asked her where the key was that locked the door between my room and the children. Please, sir, Toddy threw it down the well. Is there a locksmith in the village? No, sir, the nearest one is at Patterson. Is there a screwdriver in the house? Yes, sir. Bring it to me, and tell the coachman to get ready at once to drive me to Patterson. The screwdriver was brought, and with it I removed the lock, got into the carriage, and told the driver to take me to Patterson by the hill road, one of the most beautiful roads in America. Patterson! Exclaimed Budge. Oh, there's a candy store in that town. Come on, Toddy. Will you? Thought I, snatching the whip and giving the horses a cut. Not if I can help it. The idea of having such a drive spoiled by the clatter of such a couple. Away went the horses, and up rose a piercing shriek and a terrible roar. It seemed that both children must have been mortally hurt, and I looked out hastily, only to see Budge and Toddie running after the carriage and crying pitifully. It was too pitiful. I could not have proceeded without them, even if they had been afflicted with smallpox. The driver stopped of his own accord. He seemed to know the children's ways and their results, and I helped Budge and Toddie in, meekly hoping that the eye of Providence was upon me, and that so self-sacrificing an act would be duly passed to my credit. As we reached the hill road, my kindness to my nephews seemed to assume greater proportions, for the view before me was inexpressibly beautiful. The air was perfectly clear, and across 20 towns I saw the great metropolis itself, the silent city of Greenwood beyond it, the bay, the Narrows, the Sound, the 2 silvery rivers lying between me and the Palisades, and even, across and to the south of Brooklyn, the ocean itself. Wonderful effects of light and shadow, picturesque masses, composed of detached buildings so far distant that they seemed huddled together, grim factories turned to beautiful palaces by the dazzling reflection of sunlight from their window-panes, great ships seeming in the distance to be toy boats floating idly, with no sign of life perceptible. The whole scene recalled the fairy stories, read in my youthful days, of enchanted cities, and the illusion was greatly strengthened by the dragon-like shape of the roof of New York's post office, lying in the center of everything, and seeming to brood over all. "Uncle Harry!" Ah, that was what I expected. "Uncle Harry!" "Well, Budge?" "I always think that looks like heaven." "What does?" "Why, all that, from here over to that other sky way back there, behind everything, I mean. And I think that," here he pointed toward what probably was a photographer's roof light, "that place where it's so shiny is where God stays." Bless the child! The scene had suggested only elfindom to me, and yet I prided myself on my quick sense of artistic effects. "And over there, where that awful bright little speck is," continued Budge, "that's where dear little brother Philly is. Whenever I look over there, I see him putting his hand out." "Dear little Philly went to sleep in a box, and the Lord took him to heaven," murmured Toddie, putting together all he had seen and heard of death. Then he raised his voice and exclaimed, "Uncle Howie, you know what I's goin' to do when I be's big man? I's goin' to have hosses and towage, and I's goin' to wide over all ze cheese and all ze houses and all ze world and everything. And whole lots of little birdies is comin' in my towage and sing songs to me, and you can come too if you want to, and we'll have ice cream and tawberries, and see 'ittle fishes swimmin' down in ze water, and we'll get a gate big house that's all pitty on the outside and all pitty on the inside, and it'll be all ours, and we'll do just everything we want to.' Toddie, you're an idealist." "Ain't a dealisht." "Toddie's a goosey gander," remarked Budge, with great gravity. "Uncle Harry, do you think heaven's as nice as that place over there?" "Yes, Budge, a great deal nicer." "Then why don't we die and go there? I don't want to go on livin' forever and ever. I don't see why we don't die right away. I think we've lived enough of days." "The Lord wants us to live until we get good and strong and smart, and do a great deal of good before we die, old fellow. That's why we don't die right away." "Well, I want to see dear little Philly, and if the Lord won't let him come down here, I think he might let me die and go to heaven. Little Philly always laughed when I jumped for him. Uncle Harry, angels has wings, don't they?" "Some people think they have, old boy." "Well, I know they don't, 'cause if Philly had wings, I know he'd fly right down here and see me, so they don't." "But maybe he has to go somewhere else, Budge, or maybe he comes and you can't see him. We can't see angels with our eyes, you know." "Then what made the Hebrew children in the fiery furnace see one? Their eyes was just like ours, wasn't they? I don't care. I want to see dear little Philly awful much. Uncle Harry, if I went to heaven, do you know what I'd do?" "What would you do, Budge?" "Why, after I saw little Philly, I'd go right up to the Lord and give him a great big hug." "What for, Budge?" "Oh, 'cause he lets us have nice times, and gave me my mamma and papa and Philly, but he took him away again, And but Toddy's a dreadful bad boy sometimes, though." "Very true, Budge," said I, remembering my trunk and the object of my ride. "Uncle Harry, did you ever see the Lord?" "No, Budge. He has been very close to me a good many times, but I never saw him." "Well, I have. I see him every time I look up in the sky, and there ain't nobody with me." The driver crossed himself and whispered, "He's forever a sayin' that, and be the powers I believe him. Sometimes you'd think that the holy saints themselves was a spakin' when that b'y gits to goin' on that way." It was wonderful. Budge's countenance seemed too pure to be of the earth, as he continued to express his ideas of the better land and its denizens. As for Toddy, his tongue was going incessantly, although in a tone scarcely audible, but when I chanced to catch his expressions they were so droll and fanciful that I took him upon my lap that I might hear him more distinctly. I even detected myself in the act of examining the mental draft of my proposed letter to Helen, and of being ashamed of it. But neither Toddy's fancy nor Budge's spirituality caused me to forget the principal object of my ride. I found a locksmith, and left the lock to be fitted with a key. Then we drove to the falls. Both boys discharged volleys of questions as we stood by the gorge, and the fact that the roar of the falling water prevented me from hearing them did not cause them to relax their efforts in the least. I walked to the hotel for a cigar, taking the children with me. I certainly spent no more than 3 minutes in selecting and lighting a cigar, and asking the barkeeper a few questions about the falls, but when I turned the children were missing, nor could I see them in any direction. Suddenly before my eyes arose from the nearer brink of the gorge 2 yellowish discs, which I recognized as the hats of my nephews. Then I saw between the discs and me 2 small figures lying upon the ground. I was afraid to shout, for fear of scaring them, if they happened to hear me. I bounded across the grass, industriously raving and praying by turns. They were lying on their stomachs and looking over the edge of the cliff. I approached them on tiptoe, threw myself upon the ground, and grasped a foot of each child. "Oh, Uncle Harry!" screamed Budge in my ear, as I dragged him close to me, kissing and shaking him alternately. "I hunged over more than Toddy did." "Well, I hunged over a good deal anyhow," said Toddy in self-defense. That afternoon I devoted to making a bouquet for Miss Mayton, and a most delightful occupation I found it. It was no florist's bouquet, composed of only a few kinds of flowers, wired upon sticks, and arranged according to geometric pattern. I used many a rare flower, too shy of bloom to recommend itself to florists. I combined tints almost as numerous as the flowers were, and perfumes to which city bouquets are utter strangers. Arranging flowers is a favorite pastime of mine, but upon this particular occasion I enjoyed my work more than I had ever done before. Not that I was in love with Miss Mayton. A man may honestly and strongly admire a handsome, brilliant woman without being in love with her. He can delight himself in trying to give her pleasure, without feeling it necessary that she shall give him herself in return. Since I arrived at years of discretion, I have always smiled sarcastically at the mention of the generosity of men who were in love. They have seemed to me rather to be asking an immense price for what they offered. I had no such feeling toward Miss Mayton. There have been heathens who have offered gifts to goddesses out of pure adoration, and without any idea of ever having the exclusive companionship of their favorite divinities. I never offered Miss Mayton any attention which did not put me into closer sympathy with these same great-souled old pagans, and with such Christians as follow their good example. With each new grace my bouquet took on, my pleasure and satisfaction increased at the thought of how she would enjoy the completed evidence of my taste. At length it was finished, but my delight suddenly became clouded by the dreadful thought, "What will folks say?" Had we been in New York instead of Hillcrest, no one but the florist, his messenger, the lady, and myself would know if I sent a bouquet to Miss Mayton, but in Hillcrest, with its several hundred native-born gossips, and its acquaintance of everybody with everybody else and their affairs, I feared talk. Upon the discretion of Mike, the coachman, I could safely rely. I had already confidentially conveyed sundry bits of fractional currency to him, and informed him of one of the parties at our store whose family Mike had known in old Erin, but every one knew where Mike was employed. Every one knew. Country! That I was the only gentleman at present residing at Colonel Lawrence's. Ah, I had it. I had seen in one of the library drawers a small pasteboard box, shaped like a bandbox. Doubtless that would hold it. I found the box. It was of just the size I needed. I dropped my card into the bottom, no danger of a lady not finding the card accompanying a gift of flowers, neatly fitted the bouquet in the centre of the box, and went in search of Mike. He winked cheeringly as I explained the nature of his errand, and he whispered, "I'll do it as clane as a whistle, your honour. Mistress Clarkson's cook and myself understand each other, and I'm used to going up the back way. Divil a man can see but the angels, and they won't tell." "Very well, Mike, here's $1 for you. You'll find the box on the hat-rack in the hall." Half an hour later, while I sat in my chamber window reading, I beheld Mike, cleanly shaved, dressed and brushed, swinging up the road with my box balanced on one of his enormous hands. With a head full of pleasing fancies, I went down to supper. My new friends were unusually good. Their ride seemed to have toned down their boisterousness, and elevated their little souls. Their appetites exhibited no diminution of force, but they talked but little, and all that they said was smart, funny, or startling, so much so that when, after supper, they invited me to put them to bed, I gladly accepted the invitation. Toddy disappeared somewhere, and came back very disconsolate. "Can't find my Dolly's cadle," he whined. "Never mind, old pet," said I, soothingly. "Uncle will ride you on his foot." "But I want my Dolly's cadle," said he, piteously rolling out his lower lip. I remembered my experience when Toddy wanted to see wheels go wound, and I trembled. "Toddy," said I, in a tone so persuasive that it would be worth thousands a year to me as a salesman, if I could only command it at will. "Toddy, don't you want to ride on Uncle's back?" "No. Want my Dolly's cadle." "Don't you want me to tell you a story?" For a moment Toddy's face indicated a terrible internal conflict between old Adam and Mother Eve, but curiosity finally overpowered natural depravity, and Toddy murmured, "Yesh." "What shall I tell you about?" "'Bout Nondark." "About what?" "He means Noah and the ark," exclaimed Budge. "Dash what I shay, Nondark," declared Toddy. "Well," said I, hastily refreshing my memory by picking up the Bible, for Helen, like most people, is pretty sure to forget to pack her Bible when she runs away from home for a few days. "Well, once it rained 40 days and nights, and everybody was drowned from the face of the earth excepting Noah, a righteous man, who was saved with all his family in an ark which the Lord commanded him to build." "Uncle Harry," said Budge, after contemplating me with open eyes and mouth for at least 2 minutes after I had finished, "do you think that's Noah?" "Certainly, Budge. Here's the whole story in the Bible." "Well, I don't think it's Noah one single bit," said he, with increasing emphasis. "I'm beginning to think we read different Bibles, Budge, but let's hear your version." "Huh?" "Tell me about Noah, if you know so much about him." "I will, if you want me to. Once the Lord felt so uncomfortable 'cause folks was bad that he was sorry he ever made anybody, or any world or anything. But Noah wasn't bad. The Lord liked him first rate, so he told Noah to build a big ark, and then the Lord would make it rain so everybody should be drownded but Noah and his little boys and girls, and doggies and pussies, and mama cows, and little boy cows, and little girl cows, and hosses, and everything. They'd go in the ark, and wouldn't get wetted a bit when it rained. And Noah took lots of things to eat in the ark, cookies, and milk, and oatmeal, and strawberries, and porgies, and, oh yes, and plum puddin's, and pumpkin pies. But Noah didn't want everybody to get drownded, so he talked to folks and said, 'It's gonna rain awful pretty soon, you better be good, and then the Lord'll let you come into my ark.' And they just said, 'Oh, if it rains, we'll go in the house till it stops.' And other folks said, 'We ain't afraid of rain, we've got an umbrella.' And some more said they wasn't going to be afraid of just a rain. But it did rain, though, and folks went in their houses, and the water came in, and they went upstairs, and the water came up there, and they got on the tops of the houses, and up in big trees, and up in the mountains, and the water went after 'em everywhere and drownded everybody, only just except Noah and the people in the ark. And it rained 40 days and nights, and then it stopped, and Noah got out of the ark, and he and his little boys and girls went wherever they wanted to, and everything in the world was all theirs. There wasn't anybody to tell 'em to go home, nor no kindergarten schools to go to, nor no bad boys to fight 'em, nor nothin'. Now tell us another story." I determined that I would not again attempt to repeat portions of the Scripture narrative. My experience in that direction had not been encouraging. I ventured upon a war story. "Do you know what the war was?" I asked, by way of reconnaissance. "Oh, yes," said Budge. "Papa was there, and he's got a sword. Don't you see it hanging up there?" Yes, I saw it, and the difference between the terrible field where last I saw Tom's sword in action and this quiet room where it now hung forced me into a reverie, from which I was aroused by Budge remarking, "Ain't you going to tell us one?" "Oh, yes, Budge. One day while the war was going on, there was a whole lot of soldiers going along a road, and they were as hungry as they could be. They hadn't had anything to eat that day. Why didn't they go into the houses and tell the people they was hungry? That's what I do when I goes along roads." "Because the people in that country didn't like them. The brothers and papas and husbands of those people were soldiers too, but they didn't like the soldiers I told you about first, and they wanted to kill them." "I don't think they were a bit nice," said Budge, with considerable decision. "Well, the first soldiers wanted to kill them, Budge." "Then they was all bad, to want to kill each other." "Oh, no, they weren't. There were a great many real good men on both sides." Poor Budge looked sadly puzzled, as he had an excellent right to do, since the wisest and best men are sorely perplexed by the nature of warlike feeling. "Both parties of soldiers were on horseback," I continued, "and they were near each other, and when they saw each other they made their horses run fast, and the bugles blew, and the soldiers all took their swords out to kill each other with, when just then a little boy, who had been out in the woods to pick berries for his mamma, tried to run across the road, and caught his toe in some way, and fell down and cried. Then somebody hallooed, 'Halt!' very loud, and all the horses on one side stopped, and then somebody else hallooed, 'Halt!' and a lot of bugles blew, and every horse on the other side stopped, and one soldier jumped off his horse and picked up the little boy. He was only about as big as you, Budge, and tried to comfort him, and then a soldier from the other side came up to look at him, and then more soldiers came from both sides to look at him, and when he got better and walked home, the soldiers all rode away, because they didn't feel like fighting just then." "Oh, Uncle Harry, I think it was an awful good soldier that got off his horse to take care of that poor little boy." "Do you, Budge? Who do you think it was?" "I don't know." "It was your papa." "Oh!" If Tom could have but seen the expression upon his boy's face as he prolonged this exclamation, his loss of one of the grandest chances a cavalry officer ever had would not have seemed so great to him as it had done for years. He seemed to take in the story in all its bearings, and his great eyes grew in depth as they took on the faraway look which seemed too earnest for the strength of an earthly being to support. But Toddy, he who a fond mamma thought endowed with art sense, Toddy had throughout my recital the air of a man who was musing on some affair of his own, and Budge's exclamation had hardly died away when Toddy commenced to wave aloud an extravaganza wholly his own. "When I was a soldier," he remarked very gravely, "I had a coat, and a hat on, and a muff, and a little knake (footnote, snake, tippet), wound my neck to keep me warm, and it waned and hailed and tormed, and I felt bad, so I whallowed a sword and burned me all down dead." "And how did you get here?" I asked, with interest proportioned to the importance of Toddy's last clause. "Oh, I got up from the burn down dead and comed right here, and I want my dolly's k'adle." Oh, persistent little dragon, if you were of age, what a fortune you might make in business. "Uncle Harry, I wish my papa would come home right away," said Budge. "Why, Budge?" "I want to love him for being so good to that poor little boy in the war." "Ocken Hawwy, I wants my dolly's k'adle, 'tause my dolly's in it, and I want to shee her." Thus spake Toddie. "Don't you think the Lord loved my papa awful much for doin' that sweet thing, Uncle Harry?" asked Budge. "Yes, old fellow, I feel sure that he did." "Lord loves my papa vewy much, so I loves the Lord vewy much," remarked Toddie, "and I wants my dolly's k'adle and my dolly." "Toddie, I don't know where either of them are. I can't find them now. Do wait until morning, then Uncle Harry will look for them." "I don't see how the Lord can get along in heaven without my papa, Uncle Harry," said Budge. "Lord takes papa to heaven, and Budgie and me, and we'll go walkin' and see the Lord, and play with the angels' wings, and hash good times, and never have to go to bed at all, at all." Pure-hearted little innocents! Compared with older people whom we endure, how great thy faith, and how few thy faults! How superior thy love! A knock at the door interrupted me. "Come in," I shouted. End of Part 3. Read by Kara Schallenberg, www.kray.org, on November 8th, 2007, in Oceanside, California.